Hi there everyone, you're watching Music is a Journey. I'm Peter Scove. Today we are doing another first 10 albums of a band. And this video here, I think it's going to be a bit of a tough one for me. It's a bit of a tough one because this band has been one of my favorite bands since I was about 13 years old. And there's a lot for me to say about not only the band history, but the albums. And I'm kind of worried that if I just keep shooting off at the mouth, this video is going to be over an hour long. So what I'm going to do right from the very beginning, I'm going to decide to make this a two-part video. And whether that's two 20-minute parts or two 30-minute parts or whatever, I'm doing this in two parts. So of course, if you've looked at the background, you already know the thumbnail. This is a video about Judas Priest. And I'm a few days late because Judas Priest released their debut album on September 6th, 1974. And I do like to try to get my videos up on the same date as the album release. However, September 6th this year also saw the release of the latest album by the Japanese heavy metal band Ningen Isu, and so I kind of felt for the Ningen Isu community I should get my video up about that album first. So that's okay because it means I've had a little bit more time to listen through my Judas Priest albums, check out a little bit more information in the books that you see behind me here or on Wikipedia, watch a couple of documentaries on the internet just to refresh my memory and get me ready to tell you some things about the band that I find particularly interesting, as well as make some observations about the albums that I listened to just the last few days. I had a lot of kind of new impressions, so let's get on with it. So the beginnings of Judas Priest actually go back to the mid-1960s with a guy named Al Atkins. He'd been in a couple of different bands, and they were putting together some... They had a blues band called the Jug Blues Band, and you know, things were starting to change, the music style was starting to change, and Al Atkins was thinking that they should go, instead of being just a blues band, move on to something a little heavier. And by now Black Sabbath were starting to appear, and he wanted a band name that was something similar to Black Sabbath. And one of the guitarists in his band was listening to Bob Dylan, and he heard the song The Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest. That's what it was, right? The Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest. And so they thought, hey, Judas Priest, that sounds really cool. That sounds similar to something like Black Sabbath. And in fact, if you think about it, like a lot of the heavy bands of the day actually had that kind of two-word name with three syllables. You had like Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple or Black Sabbath, so Judas Priest fit in there very nicely. Now it was around this time also that when they needed a new guitarist, they put an ad out, and a young guy who was around 15 years old by the name of Kenny Downing came up to audition for the band. He had only just bought a guitar a couple of weeks earlier, and he quite confessed, like, I'm pretty new to the instrument, I still don't really know what I'm doing, but what do you think? And Al Atkins and his guitarist, they said, well, all right, you've obviously got a lot of learning to do, so, you know, keep it up and good luck with it. And the band continued. But problems started happening because Al Atkins wanted the band to move in a more heavier direction. They were saying that they were a blues band that was changing into a progressive blues band that wanted to be more of a heavy progressive band. And the guitarist that they had was more of a blues guy. And in the end, there was this kind of split in the band, and finally the band just dissolved around late 69, 1970. And so it was that Al Atkins was on his own for a bit, and after several months he passed by a rehearsal space. There was a church, and they had like a school, and the pastor of the church, he often rented out the rehearsal space. Lent out or rented out, I forget. But anyway, bands could go in there to the school and they could use the rooms for practicing and rehearsing. And so Al was walking by, just going to check out to see what was going on, and he heard somebody in there was playing some pretty cool music. So he, you know, went to the rehearsal room and looked in and immediately recognized there was young Kenny Downing playing guitar with a skinny guy on bass and another fellow on drums, and there was a fourth guy sitting around who apparently operated as their roadie. So he went in and spoke to them and told them, I really like the sound of what you're doing, and would you be interested in forming a band? And of course they were all very excited about it. But as they said, like, our band is called Freight, and that's the name we're going with for now. And Al said, okay, I think though that if we start something new, we might want to go with using the name Judas Priest because it's already an established name. We're already kind of known around the club circuit. And Kenny Downing was actually pretty thrilled about it because he said he'd always liked seeing that when the van drove by, you know, and it had Judas Priest on the side. He always thought that was a pretty cool name, and had hoped to be in the band, obviously, with an audition some ways back. But anyway, so that's where the band formed. Of course, the skinny guy, his name was Ian Scully Hill, Scully because he was so thin, and there was a drummer too, I've forgotten his name now, but somebody Evans. Anyway, it's this book, I'm going to tell you this right now, The Story of Judas Priest, Defenders of the Faith by Neil Daniels. This is a very detailed book. I read it many years ago. It's worth the read. And of course, more recently, Rob Halford's Confess autobiography, which focuses a lot on his sexuality, as well as the history of Judas Priest. So anyway, they form the new band, go by the name of Judas Priest. Al asks the former members of the band if they don't mind him starting a new band using the name. Everyone gives their blessings. It's all cool. So they start moving forward, writing new material, and this is around 1971 now. And they continue on for about 2 or 3 years. They actually changed drummers a fair bit. The original drummer, Mr. Evans, left. I think it was Alan Moore who stepped in at one point, and then they got a guy named Chris Campbell in, and Chris was with the band for just about a year. But things were not improving. They wanted to be moving ahead, and that was just not happening. And there was one time there was a gig where they showed up for the gig, and it was a pretty small venue, and Kenny was not thrilled about it, and he said, like, I'm not playing this place. Like, we're supposed to be moving up, and this is moving backwards. And Al was like, but, you know, we need the money, we got to do the show. And it just came to some, I don't know, disagreement at the time, and then basically after that, the band kind of split up for a bit. So Al wandered off and thought, okay, I can't be doing this anymore. You know, I've been trying for years to make money being in a band, and it's not working. And by now he was married and had a child. So he thought, I think I have to seriously start getting a real job and keep the band thing as a kind of side thing. But Kenny and Ian, they were not really ready to give up on Judas Priest. And so they decided they were going to get a new drummer and a new vocalist in. So as it turned out at that time, Ian Hill was dating a girl whose brother was a singer in a band called Hiroshima. And the band wasn't really doing all that much, and so he mentioned, you know, we're looking for a new singer. And so the sister went and told the brother, you know, my boyfriend Ian's in the band Judas Priest, they're looking for a new singer, why don't you try out for it? And so he did. He met up with Ian and Kenny and, you know, basically auditioned for the band. And the story is kind of really mixed, like there's different versions of it, but the one story that keeps coming out, which Rob Halford denies, is that he came over to the apartment, met with Kenny and Ian, and there's something like he was asked to wait in the bedroom, or he went up to the bedroom or something, and they were talking in the living room. And Doris Day was on the radio, and he was singing along to it, like singing kind of harmony to it. Rob denies it. Ian says it was Ella Fitzgerald. Kenny says it was Doris Day, whatever. Also that he was blowing on a harmonica. But whatever it was, that afternoon they decided that he would be the new singer. And since he had known a fellow by the name of John Hinch, a drummer, I don't know if it was from Hiroshima or another band, but they said, why don't you bring him along? So John Hinch came in, and the new version of Judas Priest, what incarnation we're on now, was probably like the third run of the band, since it had already broken up twice. But anyway, there we had the starting lineup with Rob Halford on vocals, Kenny Downing on guitars, Ian Hill on bass, and John Hinch on drums. So the band attracts the attention of Gull Records and gets set up for a record deal. However, as the album starts to get discussed what they're going to do, Gull Records decides that they need something extra in the band, not just a four-piece. And at first it's actually suggested that they bring in maybe a brass section, which the band vetoes. So what they decide is that they're going to get another guitarist. And as it so happens, there is another band on the Gull label called the Flying Hat Band with a guitarist named Glenn Tipton. Glenn actually has some classical training as a background, starting out playing piano. Now he's a guitarist in the band, and they talk to him about it, and they get him to join Judas Priest. The Flying Hat Band basically dissolves after that. So now we've got the lineup of Rob Halford, Glenn Tipton, KK Downing, Ian Hill, and John Hinch on drums, and they get into the studio to record their first album. So here it is, Rock-a-Rolla, with the original album cover. Apparently this bottle cap cover was originally designed for the Rolling Stones. I guess it was supposed to say Rolling Stones on here, but the Rolling Stones rejected it, and so it came over to Judas Priest, fitting in very nicely with their album, their song title, Rock-a-Rolla. Now, the one thing about this album, from the band's perspective, is that nobody is happy with the recording. The sound quality just doesn't suit them. They're not happy. Rob Halford once said it sounded like it was recorded in a garbage can. I think KK Downing said that there was just way too much hiss on it. Producer Roger Bain didn't really know how to get the band to sound right on the recording. The band, first time in the studio, didn't really know what they wanted either. And so we get an album of very interesting songs, but with a kind of poor sound quality to it. Again, with debut albums, we see that this is the band looking back. We see where the band has come from appearing here. So this is material that they had been writing and playing since like 1971, 72, 73. And it's very much a retrospective look. So we've got a lot of songs here that are a reflection of that kind of blues-based hard rock, as well as some songs stretching out a little bit more, attempting to do a little bit more musically, so more in the progressive vein. And then where it actually does get kind of heavy, it's more of that older school heavy metal, that more slower, doomy stuff. You can hear that on the track, The Winter, a Deep Freeze Winter Retreat suite, I guess, where the winter part actually has that slower, heavier riff, that dun 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 dun, like that. Another track on here, what is it? Run of the Mill. It's a longer, slower song, but where it does actually get heavy, it's again that slower, heavier sound to it. And the only song on here that actually really indicates where the band might go in the future is a track called Dying to Meet You, which is in two parts, with the first part being very slow, with clean guitars, Rob singing in very low tones and holding the notes for a long time. But then it goes into a second part, which suddenly has this upbeat kind of a galloping riff to it, that dun 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 dun. And we kind of feel that it's not exactly blues-based and it's not exactly doomy, but, you know, it does have this kind of galloping riff to it. Hey, something is up. But that's where we come out here from the first album. And yeah, again, it's an interesting album in the Judas Priest catalog because this is looking back to their early 70s material, and Rob Halford basically, I think, is just singing Al Atkins stuff on here. There's not much new that was brought in. Even Glenn Tipton kind of just joined with the material already prepared. It wouldn't be until the next album that these two newer members would contribute something for the album. I'm sure you all heard the cat meowing. Okay. So the band move on. John Hinch is not happy with the way things are going in the band. There's some disagreements and he leaves or he's fired. I don't remember. There was a discussion in here. With these cases, there are usually two sides to the story. Whatever it was, John Hinch was out, and so they brought Alan Moore, who had previously played with Judas Priest, to come back in again. And now the band are taking kind of the last of the material from Al Atkins, and they're writing lots of new material. In a way, it's a little bit like Metallica's Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, where Kill 'Em All featured a lot of the stuff that Dave Mustaine had brought to the band, and then Ride the Lightning kind of used the last kind of delicious bits that he left for them, that they had kept for themselves, whatever. So anyway, here we have in 1976 Sad Wings of Destiny, and there is so much to say about this album, because to state the most important, most prominent point about this album is to say what Martin Popoff had to say about it. He said that heavy metal was invented with Black Sabbath and Deep Purple there in 1970, but heavy metal was reinvented with Judas Priest's Sad Wings of Destiny. And this is really, really true. But it's interesting also to note like what was happening around this time in 1976. And the only albums that actually even kind of come close are Rainbow Rising, which has some of these longer, heavier, extended bits that go beyond hard rock, blues-based hard rock. You have Rush with 2112, which attempts some really epic, progressive, heavy stuff. And then, to a degree, you have also Scorpion's Virgin Killer, which is still kind of on the blues-based side, but definitely going for the kind of heavier sound. This album here is really an interesting thing. I can't remember who the producer was, but he was much more into delivering the sound of the band, and it's much better on this album from the previous one. The kind of standout tracks from this, of course, are Victim of Changes, which is an epic piece, really. And it is a combination of something that Rob Halford brought from his Hiroshima band and something that was already in existence with the Al Atkins lineup. So it's a combination of Red Light Lady and Whiskey Woman, which were put together. And we got this epic track, which has this beautiful, you know, beginning with the guitars, goes into a heavy riff, and then later on goes into that kind of spaced out part, you know, a little bit of a breathing room and some nice effects, and then comes back in with this really awesome heavy riff. And I pointed this out when I talked about the first 10 albums of Queen, but that part in the riff that goes like dun 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 dun, that is very similar to the riff in Queen's Ogre Battle from 1973 from Queen 2. 73, 74? And actually, listening to this here, there were a couple of places where I felt there is a resemblance to Queen, particularly on the Epitaph and Island of Domination bit. I felt like they could have been songs, for example, if Judas Priest had written them for Queen 2 and Queen had said, no, that's okay, we will not use them. Or if Queen had said, we have these ideas, and Judas Priest said, well, if you're not going to use them, we'll take them. And it's that kind of a feeling because, you know, after listening to Queen earlier this year for my 10 albums of Queen video, I could feel the Queen influence, not only on those two songs, not influence, but similarity, not only on those two songs, but in a few other places throughout the early catalog as well. The other big song coming off here is, of course, Jack the Ripper. A very short song, but bringing in that, you know, lurking murderer out there, danger in the air, fog in the streets, watch out, he's behind you, a theme that would crop up on, you know, many metal albums later on in the future. Of course, we also have the song Genocide, which is brings in that galloping, chugging riff again, that dun da 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 dun da 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 da, which kind of takes us back to that Dying to Meet You one, that dun da da dun da da dun da 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 da. It's like a bit of a variation on that. Then we have some other really cool stuff like Tyrant. Tyrant is one of the coolest metal tracks of the 1970s, I think. It has a great riff. It has 2 guitar solos. So much happening in the song. It is just really a full-on, well-developed heavy metal song which could have come out any time in the 1980s, but it came out in 1976, and it's just perfect like that. We have Glenn Tipton bringing in his keyboard skills with the opening prelude with the piano and some, is it timpani drums and a bit of organ and electric guitar. We also have some piano and some synthesizer, bit of organ showing up in other places on the album as well. Actually, I don't know if that was Glenn who really played that, but I can certainly imagine it could be since he had the skills, you know. What else can we say about on here? There is... yeah, of course, there's Dreamer, Deceiver, and Deceiver, which is a great pair. The first one being a really slow and very beautiful track, which develops vocally in 3 parts. The first part, the kind of very slow, low, smooth vocals of Rob Halford, with the, you know, the shadow under the tree and them, you know, taking, riding up into space. Then he brings it up a little bit with this like kind of mid-range, a little bit high. And then they have the guitar solo, and at the end he's just, you know, hitting those freaking high notes. The guitar solo itself is one of my favorite melodic guitar solos of all time as well, and I really wish I had taken the time to learn how to play it while I was still actually noodling about on the guitar a couple of decades back, but love that. And then of course you get into the actual Deceiver part, which is more of an upbeat rocker type thing, which then ends with the beginning of Dreamer, Deceiver. So really, really awesome, cool album for a lot of people. This is really the starting point of heavy metal as we know it. I certainly wouldn't argue that with tracks like Victim of Changes and Jack the Ripper, Tyrant, and even Genocide. Just really fantastic stuff telling us the new direction of heavy music. I goofed up. I don't remember where I was going to cut it and restart, so I'm restarting from now. The next album is not only one of my favorite albums of Judas Priest, but it's one of my favorite albums of all time. It is the second Judas Priest album I bought, Sin After Sin. By the time this album, they were ready to go ahead with it, they had a very fortunate, mostly, situation where they were very dissatisfied with Gull Records. Gull was still only giving them a couple of thousand for an album. Gull was not putting up any money for the band. Gull was actually in trouble themselves. And it just so happened that even though Sad Wings of Destiny did not become a huge success, they did get to appear on the Old Grey Whistle test, Rob wearing his sister's shirt, as I understand it. And yeah, somebody from CBS got wind of the band and decided that they wanted to sign Priest to CBS, which was great for them, but it also meant the legal hassle of getting out of the contract with Gull, which did not work to the band's best interest, as we saw with the first 10 albums of Styx. When Styx switched over from Wooden Nickel to A&M, they lost the rights to their catalog with Wooden Nickel, and that is the same thing that happened with Judas Priest. They lost the rights to their catalog with Gull. So those first 2 albums, as well as the original cover they did for Joan Baez's song Diamonds and Rust, that all had to remain the property of Gull, which means that Gull was able to release that material later on as the Best of Judas Priest or as the Hero Hero compilation of Rock-a-Rolla and most of Sad Wings of Destiny, plus the Diamonds and Rust original cover version on that one there, which was actually my 3rd Judas Priest purchase. So for me, the first 3 albums of Judas Priest basically are almost the beginnings of the band for me, except for my very first purchase, which we'll actually talk about in part 2 of this video. So let's get on back to Sin After Sin. CBS decides they're going to give the band £60,000 versus Gull's 2,000. And they decide they're going to get a really good producer to come in. So Roger Glover is hired to come in. However, as it went, Roger Glover says he felt right from the beginning that they weren't really interested in working with him. They weren't really interested in hearing his ideas. In one documentary on YouTube, he said he would say something like, why don't we do that riff a second time? And everyone would just kind of look at each other like, And he said it just felt like every suggestion he made was just falling on deaf ears. And, you know, by the end of the day, the band fired him. So they continued on trying to make the album by themselves. During this time, they felt that Alan Moore just couldn't perform on the drums with the kind of music they were trying to make, and so Alan Moore got fired. They had 6 days left to make the album, and Roger Glover got the call to come back in again, help them finish it, because they couldn't make decisions on their own. Simon Phillips, session drummer, was called in to record the album, and they managed to cut the album in the last 6 days. So here it is then, Sin After Sin. What a story behind all that. The opening track, here comes the cat, just a moment. Right, so the opening track, The Sinner. You know, when I listened to these albums the other day, I remember listening to Rock-a-Rolla and thinking, yeah, I still really like this album. In spite of the problems with the sound, I don't care. The songs have been with me for a long time. Sad Wings of Destiny, yeah, really, what a great album. There's so many really cool tracks that, you know, tell us the new way of heavy metal music. When The Sinner came on, though, it just, you know, went straight into me. I love that track. And, you know, when I made a video a couple of years back about the state of heavy metal and hard rock in 1977, it was inspired by this album. Because when I listened to songs like The Sinner and Raw Deal, I thought, who else was making heavy music like this at that time? Anybody? And not really so many bands were. This was a fresh, new way to make heavy music, heavy metal songs. This was the new life, which had started on the previous album, and boy did they move it ahead here. Songs like The Sinner, I think, are just fantastic. It has so many riffs in it, and I think it was even Kronos from Venom who said that he and his friends used to call this album Riff After Riff, rather than Sin After Sin, because there's just so much going on with guitar riffs here. That middle part where the guitars are just wailing, the drums are going all over the place, and a second guitar is just keeping this nice kind of steady, calm riff, and Rob is just kind of singing calmly over it while kind of all chaos is going on in the background. Really amazing. Wonderful imagery with this whole Sinner song, like was it like demonic vultures searching out the carcasses of war? Just fantastic imagery in the lyrics. And then after that amazing over 6 minute long opening track, we come into their cover of Diamonds and Rust by Joan Baez. And it really follows up so nicely. It is a slower melodic song, but still keeps the rocking guitars in there. Lyrically it's a bit different, but it doesn't matter. It just seems to work so well after The Sinner. Then we got on with Starbreaker, which is, you know, one of their early songs featuring a kind of fantastic type character thing here. So a nice, good, heavy rocking song. Last Rose of the Summer I always chalked up as being the oddball in the catalog, this kind of bizarre, like normal ballad. But listening to it again the other day, I noticed it is not a pretty lovesick ballad. It has a bit of a serious side to it, not only in the vocal delivery, but also in some of the lead guitar work. It is not a pretty song. There is something kind of serious about it, maybe related to that kind of, Thread of Winter type thing, I don't know, but it's not so pretty as I originally thought it was. Side 2, we have that whole Let Us Pray and Call for the Priest. What a quick-paced rocker. Can you hear the double bass drum in there? Wow, actually that is one of the songs that I didn't listen to as much, but boy did it ever perk up my ears the other day. And then Raw Deal, which I've always loved. Yes, I know it's about a gay bar. I don't care. Doesn't bother me because I'm not going there. But, that riff is such a mean and dirty riff, and they're just all these like guitar accents coming in that just make the song so nasty. I mean, it's a fighting song, it sounds like a guy going into a bar and smacking the bartender and looking around. Everybody's looking at him for some action, and it's going to be trouble, it's going to be fighting. Yeah, whatever. I mean, that's what it feels like. And then, of course, it goes into another part before concluding. Then you have, like, Here Come the Tears, which is like a 3-part song, starting off that kind of very slow bit, like, once I dreamed love would come in, sweep me up away, like that. And then it goes into the strumming acoustic guitar. There's some piano coming in. It's a little bit more emotional now coming in. And then it just hits into that, screaming and heavy riff part. So really cool that. And then you wrap it up with Dissident Aggressor, later on covered by Slayer and probably other bands too. Just a short, really hard-hitting, wicked song. So what a fantastic album. Most people I know talk about the importance of Sad Wings of Destiny and what a fantastic album Stained Class is, the importance of British Steel, but this one here is probably the Judas Priest album that one of them that stick with me the most. And it also sounds really good. At least this remaster version here just sounds terrific. So, of course, Simon Phillips is the session drummer, but they can't keep him, so they get a drummer by the name of Les Binks in to perform for them on tour. He stays with the band now for the next 2 studio albums as well as the live album. And we come out with what is considered by many the finest Judas Priest album, or certainly one of the most important ever, Stained Class. I'm actually going to talk about this one and Hellbent for Leather, aka Killing Machine, actually Killing Machine, also known as Hellbent for Leather, together because these were the 2 albums I did not have when I was a youngster. Of course, I was familiar with Rockarola and Sad Wings of Destiny from the Hero Hero album. I had Sin After Sin, British Steel, Point of Entry, Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, Turbo. I had all of those. I never got these 2. And I think it was just because I would have, but then I just started finding out about more and more bands. And so I decided to expand my cassette collection with the Iron Maiden, Scorpions, Accept, YNT, Virgin Steel, whatever I could get my hands on that was, heavy metal, or certainly at least very aggressive hard rock. So looking at these 2, these were the 2 albums that I didn't actually really get into until maybe about 10 years ago when I went back to Judas Priest and I decided I'm going to fill up the albums that I don't have in my collection. However, you cannot consider these 2 albums as a pair, because they're actually not. Similar to, as I think I said with Styx, these are kind of more back-to-back albums. This album, Stained Class, is known as Judas Priest still keeping some of their progressive leanings that carry over from their earlier albums. And in fact, when you look at the track list on here, there are 9 songs, and the album is over 43 minutes long. 4 of the tracks are over 5 minutes long. 1 of them is over 6 minutes long. Whereas when you look at Killing Machine, including the Green Manalishi, which was actually not intended to be part of the original track list. So with that added on and having 11 songs, it comes out to just over 37 minutes. So about 6 minutes shorter, but 2 songs longer. Most of the tracks on here are, within the 3-minute range somewhere. I think there are 4 tracks that just go over 4 minutes, Delivering the Goods actually being 4 minutes and 16 seconds. That is the longest track on the album. Hellbent for Leather is actually 2 minutes and 41 seconds. And that includes with that intro, the intro to the song, right? Which actually takes up a little bit of time as well. So actually very different albums. Same in that we are now looking at the new heavy metal sound. I think Sad Wings of Destiny and Sin After Sin was the development of that sound, and these two albums are consistent in the way that that is how Judas Priest are now sounding. The riffs, the guitar solos, the song structures, the singing style, the lyrical topics, these two are very consistent in that way. Just this one delivers us with longer tracks, sometimes a little bit more developed, a little bit more complex musically. This one focuses more on the tight, compact ones. And in a way, you can think about this as like Slayer's Hell Awaits and Rain and Blood. Because Hell Awaits, I think it was about 9 tracks, and it was also an album that had some longer tracks stretching out over 5 minutes long with, you know, multiple riffs going on in them. And then Rain and Blood was just like a whole bunch of really short, intense rockers, you know, or rockers, I mean like thrash metal bits, extreme metal tracks. So in a way it's a bit like that. But anyway, these two albums here, same lineup. A lot of similarities about them, just this one having the longer tracks, this one being the more shorter, concise tracks, and in a way in response to the punk rock music scene where basically intense tracks should be around 2-3 minutes long, no more. Of course, the title Killing Machine was changed to Hellbent for Leather for the US because there had just been one of those school shootings in the US, which just seemed to happen fairly regularly. I don't know how many other albums have had their album titles changed because of that, but this was one case of that kind of thing. And that's it. That is the first 5 albums of Judas Priest, and I certainly have talked a lot. We can see at this point here the band have had basically difficulty with drummers. They've gotten their difficulties with their labels out of the way. With CBS, they are just climbing the ladder, basically. And, you know, by the end of the decade, they put out their Unleashed in the East album, which is kind of a bit of a joke about it because when it came to mixing the album, Rob wasn't having the best nights for some of his vocal performances, and so they re-recorded some of them in the studio, which then, when that leaked out, earned the album the title Unleashed in the Studio. But it is essentially a live album, just with some of the vocal parts done over, and I think there may have been a couple of other things, but I mean, who is not guilty of that anyway? I think most live albums from the 70s actually did have some, you know, post-recording fix-ups here and there. But there we have it. So first 5 albums, I'll be getting on to the next 5 albums in my next video. It's going to be recorded probably tomorrow, so it's probably going to come out a day later than this one. Let's continue the story in that one then. Thanks for watching, staying with me so far. Leave any comments you like. I mean, tell me what you think about these first 5 albums. What do you think about Judas Priest? Was there something really important that I missed? Because, you know, I actually just listen and read, and then 1 or 2 days later sit down to do this. So no notes. Anyway, see you in the next video then. All right, cheers folks. Bye.